Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate 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 Vasudevaya.
Reading from Srimad Bhagavad-Gītā as it is, Chapter 2, Contents of the Gita summarized, Text 17. Avinashi tu tad vidhi,
Avinashi tu tad vidhi,
yena sarvam idam tatam,
yena sarvam idam tatam,
vinasham avyayasya,
vinasham avyayasya,
nakaschit kartum arhati.
nakaschit kartum arhati.
Avinashi tu tad vidhi,
Avinashi tu tad vidhi,
yena sarvam idam tatam,
yena sarvam idam tatam,
vinasham avyayasya,
vinasham avyayasya,
nakaschit kartum arhati.
nakaschit kartum arhati.
Avinashi tu tad vidhi,
Avinashi tu tad vidhi,
yena sarvam idam tatam,
yena sarvam idam tatam,
vinasham avyayasya,
vinasham avyayasya,
nakaschit kartum arhati.
nakaschit kartum arhati.
अविनाशु तु तद्विधि
Avinashi tu tad vidhi,
येन सर्वं इदं तत्त्वं
yena sarvam idam tatam,
विनाशम् अव्ययस्य
avinasham avyayasya,
न कश्चित् कर्तुम् अर्हति
nakaschit kartum arhati.
अविनाशी तु तद्विधि
Avinashi tu tad vidhi,
येन सर्वम् इदं ततं
yena sarvam idam tatam,
विनाशम् अव्ययस्यास्य
vinasham avyayasya,
न कश्चित् कर्तुम् अर्हति
nakaschit kartum arhati.
अविनाशी तु तद्विधि
Avinashi tu tad vidhi,
येन सर्वं इदं ततं
yena sarvam idam tatam,
विनाशम् अव्ययस्य
vinasham avyayasya,
न कश्चित् कर्तुम् अर्हति
nakaschit kartum arhati.
अविनाशी तु तद्विधि
Avinashi tu tad vidhi,
येन सर्वमिदं ततं
yena sarvam idam tatam,
विनाशमभ्ययस्यस्य
vinasham avyayasya,
न कश्चित् कर्तुमर्हति
nakaschit kartum arhati.
अविनाशी च तद्विधि
Avinashi tu tad vidhi,
येन सर्वमिदं ततं
yena sarvam idam tatam,
विनाशमव्ययस्यास्य
vinasham avyayasya,
कश्चित् कर्तुमर्हति
nakaschit kartum arhati.
Avinashi,
Avinashi,
imperishable,
imperishable,
tu, but, tat, that, vidhi, know it, yena, by whom, sarvam, all of the body, idam, this, tatam, pervaded, vinasham,
vinasham,
destruction,
destruction,
avyayasya, of the imperishable, asya, of it, nakaschit, no one, kartum, to do, arhati, is able. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace H.G Ajay Govinda Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. That which pervades the entire body, you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul. Purport. This verse more clearly explains the real nature of the soul, which is spread all over the body. Anyone can understand what is spread all over the body. It is consciousness. Everyone is conscious of the pains and pleasures of the body in part or as a whole. This spreading of consciousness is limited within one's own body. The pains and pleasures of one body are unknown to another. Therefore, each and every body is the embodiment of an individual soul, and the symptom of the soul's presence is perceived as individual consciousness. The soul is described as 1/10,000th part of the upper portion of the hair point in size. The Shvetashvatara Upanishad 5.9 confirms this. Balagra shatabhagasya shatadha kalpitasya cha bhago jivah savigneya sajanantyaya kalpate. When the upper point of a hair is divided into 100 parts, and again each of such parts is further divided into 100 parts, each such part is the measurement of the dimension of the spirit soul. Similarly, the same version is stated, Keshagra shatabhagasya shatangsha sadrishatmakaha jiva shukshmo swarupoyam sankhyatito hi chitkanaha. There are innumerable particles of spiritual atoms which are measured as 1/10,000th of the upper portion of the hair. Therefore, the individual particle of spirit soul is a spiritual atom smaller than the material atoms, and such atoms are innumerable. This very small spiritual spark is the basic principle of the material body, and the influence of such a spiritual spark is spread all over the body as the influence of the active principle of some medicine spreads throughout the body. This current of the spirit soul is felt all over the body as consciousness, and that is the proof of the presence of the soul. Any layman can understand that the material body minus consciousness is a dead body, and this consciousness cannot be revived in the body by any means of material administration. Therefore, consciousness is not due to any amount of material combination, but to the spirit soul. In the Mundaka Upanishad 3.1.9, the measurement of the atomic spirit soul is further explained. Eshoratma chetasa veditavyo yasmin pranaha panchada samvivesha pranaschittam sarvamotam prajanam yasmin vishuddhe vibhavatyesha atma. The soul is atomic in size and can be perceived by perfect intelligence. This atomic soul is floating in the 5 kinds of air, Pran, Apan, Vyan, Saman and Udan, is situated within the heart and spreads its influence all over the body of the embodied living entities. When the soul is purified from the contamination of the 5 kinds of material air, its spiritual influence is exhibited. The Hatha Yoga system is meant for controlling the 5 kinds of air and circling the pure soul by different kinds of sitting postures, not for any material profit, but for liberation of the minute soul from the entanglement of the material atmosphere. So the constitution of the atomic soul is admitted in all Vedic literatures, and it is also actually felt in the practical experience of any sane man. Only the insane man can think of this atomic soul as all-pervading Vishnu Tattva. The influence of the atomic soul can be spread all over a particular body. According to the Mundaka Upanishad, this atomic soul is situated in the heart of every living entity. And because the measurement of the atomic soul is beyond the power of appreciation of the material scientists, some of them assert foolishly that there is no soul. The individual atomic soul is definitely there in the heart along with the supersoul, and thus all the energies of bodily movement are emanating from this part of the body. The corpuscles which carry the oxygen from the lungs gather energy from the soul. When the soul passes away from this position, the activity of the blood generating fusion ceases. Medical science accepts the importance of the red corpuscles, but it cannot ascertain that the source of the energy is the soul. Medical science, however, does admit that the heart is the seat of all energies of the body. Such atomic particles of the spirit whole are compared to the sunshine molecules. In the sunshine, there are innumerable radiant molecules. Similarly, the fragmental parts of the Supreme Lord are atomic sparks of the rays of the Supreme Lord, called by the name prabhu, or superior energy. So whether one follows Vedic knowledge or modern science, one cannot deny the existence of the spirit soul in the body. And the science of the soul is explicitly described in the Bhagavad-Gītā by the personality of Godhead himself. Om Ajnanatimidandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manubhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kada Mahyam Tadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavamsha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamsha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Deenabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So first I would like to say that I am not qualified by any means for speaking the Bhagavad-Gītā in Vrindavan, apart from one qualification, that I will be repeating whatever I have heard from my Guru Maharaj, Hanumat Vishak Maharaj, from my parents who are disciples of Gopal Krishna Maharaj. So whatever I have heard from the authorities, I will try to repeat that. But apart from that, I have no other qualification for speaking. And this is the first time I am speaking, giving a lecture in Vrindavan, so please forgive me for all my mistakes and my ignorance. So we will start the lecture. And also please consider me as a kid in front of all of you. You are all great scholars and devotees in Vrindavan, and I am simply a ignorant child in front of all the great devotees here. And it is only the mercy of devotees like Parvati Mataji that they have encouraged a foolish young kid like me to speak. Otherwise, there's no comparison. My knowledge is like the knowledge of the frog in the well compared to the devotees here. So I would just like to start today's lecture with reading the translation one more time. That which pervades the entire body you should know to be indestructible. No one is able to destroy that imperishable soul. So I wanted to read the commentaries of 6 different acharyas just to show how Srila Prabhupada derives his commentaries from the commentaries of the previous acharyas, and what I found was very clear connection between the commentaries of Baldev Vidyabhushan and Vishwanath Chakravarti and the commentary of Srila Prabhupada. Just like Srila Prabhupada is referring to the description in the Shvetashvatara Upanishad of the size of the spirit soul. So this is actually the same thing we find in the commentary of Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also. So I thought that just to read those commentaries also to get an idea of how these great souls like Srila Prabhupada and Baldev Vidyabhushan and Vishwanath Chakravarti address this verse. So Sridhar Swami, in his commentary to this verse, he says, "The imperishable soul, whose existence is a reality, has been delineated and emphasized in a general manner." Now in this verse it is stated, "But know that," meaning to know the reality of the eternal soul within every living entity. So I'm explaining some of this commentary of Srila Sridhar Swami. So when the word tat is referred to, the word tat in English is translated as that. So this refers to what is described in the previous verse. So the previous verse, I will just read the Sanskrit in translation. Na sato vidyate bhavo, na bhavo vidyate satah, ubhayorapi lishtontas, tvanayos tattvadarshibhi. Those who are seers of the truth have concluded that of the non-existent, the material body, there is no endurance, and of the eternal, the soul, there is no change. This they have concluded by studying the nature of both. So when we refer to that, when Krishna is saying that in text 17, in today's verse, it is referring to the imperishable soul that he was just describing in the previous verse. So Srila Swami is saying to know that which is being discussed from the previous verse, meaning to know the reality of the eternal soul within every living entity, pervading as the fitness to the physical body, which is subject to the transient modifications in the beginning known as birth and at its end known as death. It is not possible to modify the soul, which is imperishable and impossible to destroy. So he is describing the soul as if a witness to the changes of the physical body. So the soul, if I look at my past photos, my childhood photos, I can be a witness to the change that this body, this material body is undergoing, this physical body is undergoing. And beyond me, beyond every living entity, beyond every spirit soul is of course the supreme witness, which is the super soul, the Paramatma, who is witnessing all the actions of the spirit soul in this world, both the bad, all the fruits, the bad and the good fruits that the living entity enjoys like a bird on a tree. So the other interesting point that comes up here is the description of the soul as imperishable. So imperishable and impossible to destroy. One of the words that is used is immutable, and the word immutable actually reminded me of how scientists discuss mutations or changes to the genetic code in every living entity. That's what when I did my PhD, it was in computational biology, so this is kind of like my subject area is computational biology, bioinformatics. So it just reminded me a little bit of how scientists are very interested to find out the changes in genetic code any organism undergoes. And of course, as we understand from Srila Prabhupada's scriptures, Srila Prabhupada's teachings and the Vedic scriptures, is that the Darwinian theory of evolution has many flaws and many holes and cannot explain the speciation, the origin of all the species, but rather it is the design of the Supreme Lord that is the origin of all these species. But so the scientists, they try to explain the origin of all these species through these changes, these random mutations in the genetic code of living organisms, but they have not been able to give any experimental evidence to show how these mutations could have led to the speciation that we see in this world. In fact, many of the scientists that have tried to experiment, that have tried to simulate evolution in the laboratory, have failed to generate any new species. For example, one of the species that is used to try to simulate evolution in the laboratory is Drosophila melanogaster, which is a fruit fly, which gives birth to like 20,000 baby fruit flies every day in the female. So they try to, they have gone through 300 generations. Some of the laboratories have gone through 300 of these generations in just a year, and still they have not been able to obtain any new species, even though they changed many factors. Sometimes they put the food on the ground so they would not need wings, or sometimes they would put the food up in some simulated or in the laboratory in a protected glass environment in some higher place, or on the ceiling of the glass case that the flies were in. But they have not been able to, every time that there was some mutation, it came back to just being a fruit fly. So even though there were some small changes in the organism, just like size of the wings or the size of the eyes or color of the eyes, small changes did happen, but it was ultimately only a fruit fly. So I was just thinking that scientists are very interested in mutation and the changes that this world undergoes, or that the body undergoes, but they are not so knowledgeable about that which does not change. And that which does not change, the knowledge of that which does not change, is given in the Bhagavad-Gītā or the Srimad Bhagavatam in our Vedic scriptures. So the scientists are mostly looking at the external, that which does change, that which does mutate to some degree. We do undergo some changes, like for example, butterflies or moths in Britain. When the tree became polluted, when the environment was polluted, the tree bark became dark, and so the moth population evolved to have darker wings to camouflage themselves from predators. So this type of microevolution does happen, but of course there's no evidence for how, based on microevolution or small changes in the genetic code, how that could evolve into that, there's no evidence to show how that moth could evolve into a completely different species. So there's no evidence for that. And so even in fact, when the tree bark became white over time, when pollution decreased, when the clean natural gas was starting to be used in the United Kingdom, then the population again came back to the original white color. So it shows that these changes, all of these changes were transient, and they came back to their original phylogeny, their original body type. The organisms didn't evolve into new species. So all of this is what the scientists are trying to study, the external, that which is transient, that which is changing, but they do not have information about the source of all this. The source of all the transient material that we see in this world is actually the spiritual, of course it is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Supreme Personality of Godhead is the source of the universes and all that we see, but the soul also has a role to play. The soul, with its consciousness, it affects the material body. So it is causing the material body. It is causing the changes in the material body, or the For example, if the soul, whatever the soul desires, that is what manifests in the material body, according to what it deserves also. So, just like Krishna said in the Bhagavad-Gītā, that all souls are transmigrating from one body to another, and the next body that they get is based on their desires and what they deserve, so their karma. So the soul is actually what is causing the spirit soul, that which we cannot see but which is eternal, which is immutable, which is unchanging. That is what is causing, or what is the initiating factor for the changes and modifications that we see in the body. So it is described that there is one scientist called Erwin Schrödinger. He was a quantum mechanic physicist. He was studying quantum mechanics, and he was a German scientist, and he was very fascinated by the question. He was trying to find out the position of electrons inside atoms. So he came up with a wave function to try to describe this, and he was very confounded by the fact that this wave function had many solutions. It did not have just one solution, just like many equations have one solution. Most equations, or many equations in mathematics, have one solution. His wave equation had many solutions, so he was confounded. And so he, at that time, was reading Vedanta. So he was inspired by the Sanskrit text he was reading. And he was reading the books of Vedanta from the East, from India. And so he came to the conclusion that actually the reason there are so many solutions to the wave equation is because it is the observer that decides the position of the electron. That the position of the electron is actually based on the observation. It's called the observation effect in quantum mechanics, that the observer, that the position of the electron is actually like a cloud. It's a probability, and you cannot pinpoint its position and momentum for one single place where it is. For any given moment, you cannot define its position and momentum at the same time. So that's called the uncertainty principle, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. So he basically realized that it's actually consciousness, and he writes in his book, What is Life? He writes that it is consciousness which influences matter, which causes matter to take the shape that it does. So it's our soul which causes the body to act as it does. So if my body develops certain diseases, it is, like we say, stress can cause so many diseases. So it's actually quantum mechanics scientists who are studying quantum mechanics also realized that it's the consciousness which affects the body. So same principle is stated by Krishna in the Bhagavad-Gītā, that according to our consciousness, that is what we will obtain in our next life. So when Krishna says that yam yam vapi smaran bhavam tyajatyante kalivanam, he says that whatever we think at the moment of death, that is what defines our next destination. So that is a very scientific principle. Prabhupada used to say, this Bhagavad-Gītā is not a religious text. It is not a fundamentalist Hindu text. It is actually a very scientific text which describes, it's the science of the soul, the science of God. And this same principle has been found to be in quantum mechanics, in physics. Great scientists are also realizing the same principle of the soul. So even though externally it may seem that when Krishna describes the soul, it may seem unscientific, it may seem that it is based on religious superstition or faith, but it is actually not based on any religious superstition or faith. It is a very scientific principle. And scientists, even cardiologists, are coming to realize how scientific and how real the principle of the soul is. Because one scientist is a cardiologist, Michael Sabam, in Emory University, which is one of the top 10 medical colleges in the US. So he when he was doing cardiopulmonary resuscitation, CPR, on his patients in Emory University, he found there were many patients, and he recorded their accounts, many patients that could remember the exact discussion between the surgeons in the operating theater, and also some of the tools that were used by the surgeons inside the operating theater. And there's no way that this information could have been given to the patients, because the patients are generally unconscious, or even before they enter the operating theater, or definitely before the operation starts, all the patients are rendered unconscious with anesthesia. And in fact, there's one case which completely could not be explained by scientists in any materialistic explanation, and that was the case of a woman called Pam Reynolds, who had a aneurysm in her brainstem, and so the vessel had expanded so much, the blood vessel had expanded so much that it had to be drained, the fluid in it had to be drained, otherwise it could cause catastrophic destruction of her blood vessel leading to the brainstem, and because that's where all the connection is from between the brain and the body, she could become paralyzed. So the surgeon, Dr. Robert Spenslow in the Barrow Institute in Arizona, in Phoenix, Arizona, the neurologist who was operating, he had to drain all of her blood from the brain. So her brain was dead. There's no blood in her brain, no measurable activity in the brain. And her heart had also been stopped by the surgeons. So she was clinically dead for the operation. And after the operation, she was able to recall that the surgeons discussed during the operation that they would insert the catheter into the right femoral artery instead of the left, because the left one was too thin. She could remember that. This is a very precise, detailed discussion between the surgeons. And she could also remember the tool that was used to drill into her skull resembled an electric toothbrush. And it actually does. It vibrates like an electric toothbrush, and it looks like an electric toothbrush. And who would think that the tool used to drill into your skull resembles an electric toothbrush? If I think of a drill used to go into my skull, I would imagine a drill machine, like something that is pointed. But this tool actually, due to the structure of the skull, it's actually like a vibrating toothbrush. That's what is used to drill through the skull. So these types of details she could remember, and there's not just Pam Reynolds, but there's many such cases. They're called near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences in which the patients, and now this is actually considered a scientific field of study. Previously, my Guru Maharaj, Hanuman Prashad Maharaj, he was serving in the Bhaktivedanta Institute previously, and now he does preaching in academics. So under his guidance, I have also learned from him. So he was describing that previously consciousness, the term consciousness, the word consciousness was taboo in all scientific seminars and conferences. But now consciousness is a valid word to be used in science. This is probably the effect of Srila Prabhupada's preaching in the West, and Srila Prabhupada's mission is purifying the minds of people all around the world. And near-death experiences previously used to be considered a subject which was pseudoscience or parapsychology, but now it's actually a valid area of research in neuroscience, which is a very well-respected area of science nowadays. So near-death experience and out-of-body experiences, except the problem still is the scientists are still trying to find a material explanation. They still try to say that maybe the brain is still responsible for some of these experiences. But the fact that she was, for example, Pam Reynolds was able to hear this discussion, even though she was unconscious, there's no measurable activity in her brain, no measurable activity in her blood, in her heart was not beating, and so there's no blood in her brain. So how could the brain have any activity, and also her ears were plugged, her nose, her eyes were shut, taped. So in these types of examples provide evidence for how the soul can exist outside the body. And in fact, not just these. In my own family, it is described that my father told me once that there was a case where one of his older relatives had passed away, and so the body was lying and the funeral was about to start, but 2 hours after he had died, he suddenly woke up. And the doctors had confirmed when he died, the doctors had confirmed that yes, he is dead. There is no pulse, no breathing, he is dead. He was declared dead, but still 2 hours later he woke up. And he told the story that he was taken by the agents of Yamaraj, the Yamadutas, to Yamlok, and in front of Yamaraj he was taken there in the court of Yamaraj, but the Yamaraj told his agents, "You brought the wrong guy." It was a mismatch of it was a misunderstanding of the name. So it was the same guy, but it was from in a different street. And he predicted, the relative who came back to life after 2 hours, he predicted that this guy in this particular street will die at such and such a date, 2 days from now, and that's what happened. So these cases are real, and it is not just in India, but it's actually around the world. These cases do happen where you find people who have, even for example, Pam Reynolds described that when she exited her body, she floated into what she saw, a tunnel of light, and she saw, so many of these descriptions all over the world actually match with each other. They're not, it's not like, for example, many scientists try to explain this away, that this is what you have been taught in your culture, so that's why your brain develops these types of ideas. But if I was taught this in India, okay, but if I'm an American and I have the same out-of-body experience as an Indian, and also Europeans and all over the world, people who have these out-of-body experiences share the same types of experiences, then we can understand that this is not based on the tradition, or it's not based on what is taught to us. It's actually a scientific fact that when we leave our body, we are taken to these agents of Yamaraj take us, and the description is given by many elderly people or people who are about to die of very ferocious looking men with these ropes and these growling fierce dogs barking away, and these ghostly figures, and the path to hell. So it's so the science of the soul, we have a lot of evidence. Actually, in America, when we do scientific preaching to the youth, so we give them these examples so they can understand that when we're discussing this Bhagavad-Gītā, it's not just a fundamental religious text, but it's actually a scientific book, a scientific piece of literature. And not only near-death experiences or out-of-body experiences, but also past life memories. There have been examples of children who have remembered their past life with such detail that they could recall the exact street, the exact village where they lived. And Professor Ian Stevenson of the University of Virginia, he actually made sure in his book, Cases of Reincarnation, in his book in which he records these cases of reincarnation, he was able to actually confirm what these kids were telling him. So anyway, enough about the scientific evidences. So we do have scientific evidences and which show us how the soul can exist outside the body and does transmigrate from one body to another. And it's actually very important fundamental fact, because it is very important to understand this fundamental fact, because it defines our whole outlook for life. If this is my only life, if this is the only life I'm going to live, then I might as well do anything that I want, and there's no repercussions in the afterlife, and there's no God to judge me. So it really does affect our worldview, our morals. This is very connected to our idea of right and wrong. And so the fundamental problem with the Western world, the immorality that is spreading, and also in India now, everywhere in the world, and the irreligiousness, all of the evils in society, it is because of this ignorance of the fact of reincarnation, of karma, these principles of karma and reincarnation. So these are very fundamental principles that have to be taught to every person in this world. And once they realize this, once they realize that these are not just sayings of old people from 5,000 years ago, but these are actually facts that happen even today, and there's documented cases of evidence, scientific evidence that shows that these are all true, that the soul transmigrates from one body to another, leaves this body and goes to another body. So when they realize this, then it really strongly affects the consciousness that yes, there is karma. Whatever I do, I will be judged for whatever I do in this life. And that helps us to act correctly and morally, and it helps us to realize that we're not this body. Because otherwise, if we just think this is the only life, there is no such thing as a soul, all we are is just a bag of chemicals, which is what the Darwinian theory of evolution is based on, or all the theories in science are based on, then there's no real reason for right and wrong. There's no, if we're all just a bag of chemicals, then it's just a mixture of chemicals interacting with each other, then the real and wrong, right and wrong, it just loses its basis. So now just come back to the commentaries. So Ramanujacharya, he says in his commentary, it should be understood that the soul is indestructible and is the principle by which the physical body is permeated. The insentient body is completely distinct from the sentient soul. So he's saying that Ramanuja is saying that the soul is completely distinct from the insentient body. It's not that some schools of thought teach that the soul is a part of the body, or that the soul was generated from the body, or that the soul is based on the body, or the soul is based on the brain, or the mind is based on the brain. But no, Ramanujacharya is teaching that the sentient soul is completely distinct from the insentient body. By reason of its pervasive nature, the soul is very subtle. In fact, so exceedingly subtle is the soul that it is verily incapable of being destroyed, being subatomic in essence. So because scientists nowadays try to, using nuclear fission, they try to generate energy by dividing atoms, but the soul is subatomic. It's so fine, it is so subtle, that it's subtler than even an electron. An electron is so subtle and fine that actually an electron is not even a particle. Scientists don't know if it's a wave or a particle. That's called the wave-particle duality. De Broglio's wave-particle duality, he considered that, this scientist De Broglio, he realized that this electron is both a wave and a particle. And he realized that because scientists, they observed an electron at two places at once, and they were confused. How is it possible that an electron can be observed at two places at once? And the electron can pass through walls. It's called tunneling in physics, in quantum physics. So they were confused. This is not possible in classical physics. It's not possible for a single body to exist two places simultaneously in classical physics. Otherwise, all the equations get messed up. The position, you cannot have two positions at the same time. And the fact that it can pass through walls, that also confounded classical physicists. So what they realized is that it's actually not a wave, it's not a particle, it's actually a wave. So if this electron is so fine, so subtle, so incomprehensible, then what to speak of the soul? The photon, for example, the particle of the sun rays, this example is given by Prabhupada, the sunshine, they're innumerable radiant molecules. So these are called photons. So these are also waves and particles simultaneously. So the Vedantic principle of simultaneous oneness and difference is found in quantum mechanics. It's applicable in quantum mechanics, and it helps solve the problems of quantum mechanics. This Vedantic principle of simultaneous oneness and difference, that the electron is simultaneously a wave and simultaneously a particle. So it is able to, so the electron is so fine and so subtle, but the soul is a particle which is even finer than this electron or the proton or the photon. And these particles actually, they all have their own frequencies at which they are vibrating. So if you study physics, you realize that there are many different types of rays. It's called the electromagnetic radiation spectrum, where you see, ultraviolet rays, and you see X-rays and gamma rays and radio waves. They all have their own different level of frequency and wavelength. And so we can see that what is the building block of matter in this universe? The atoms. And the atoms are comprised of these particles. And these particles are vibrating at certain frequencies. So what is at the basis of matter is the frequency at which these particles are vibrating. So vibration is the basis of matter. And vibration in Sanskrit is called shabda. So when we translate shabda as sound, scientists get confused. How can sound be the source of matter? But the word is vibration. If you use the word vibration, Prabhupada says transcendental vibration. So every electron, every particle is vibrating at its own frequency, and this is called the string theory, which means that every single particle has its own vibration, like a string vibrates. So every single particle is vibrating at its own frequency. So you can see that how, if you go deeper into physics, you come down to the same principle that the Vedanta or the Gita teaches us, that at the origin of this universe is from sound, or which is, another word is vibration. So Ramanujacharya, he says that there is no thing which is of different or of a dissimilar nature from it which in any way is capable of destroying the soul. For whatever there is existing is pervaded by the soul as well, and being pervaded by the soul itself verifies its less gross and most subtle position of all being subatomic. Such things as weapons, water, fire, air, cold, etc. cannot influence or be the agents of destruction for the imperishable soul, being all pervaded by it. So if an electron can pass through walls, then the wall cannot destroy the electron. Just like ghosts can pass through, like if you, let's say I want to kill a ghost, then I cannot do it with a material element. Like I cannot shoot a bullet and kill a ghost, because it passes through. Or the same thing with an electron, because these things are subtler. So water, fire, air, all of these elements, the soul is subtler than all of these. Just like an electron is subtler than all of these, or so the soul, any particle, they cannot be destroyed by water, fire, air, cold, etc. So the soul is much subtler, much finer. It's a spiritual particle after all. It's not even a material particle, so it cannot be destroyed by these elements such as water, fire, air, cold, and these weapons. So now I'll just go to Madhvacharya's commentary. In how many ways is this to be understood? Endlessly, not limited by space, eternal, indestructible. It cannot be destroyed by curses or magic, and while being unable to be destroyed, is also immutable. So Madhvacharya is just stating that this is described in so many different ways in all the scriptures. Now begins the summation. Thus it is stated in the Mahavaraha Purana. Even though the soul within the physical body of every living entity is eternal, and even though in all respects the use of the word tu confirms that eternity refers only to Lord Krishna alone, the temporal transmigration of bodies, killing pain, incompleteness, these four attributes of destruction are never spoken as referring to Lord Krishna. However, in relation to all other things, there surely is a result in the loss. It is stated in the Paramashruti, attributes are threefold, relating to time, relating to place, and to being complete in themselves. All these attributes are residing fully only in the Supreme Lord Krishna exclusively. So Madhvacharya refers to 4 attributes: temporal, transmigration of bodies, feeling pain, incompleteness, and the word 2 confirms that eternity refers only to Lord Krishna alone. The temporal, transmigration of bodies, feeling pain, incompleteness. So temporality, the temporariness, the transmigration of bodies, feeling pain and incompleteness. These are not affecting the Supreme Personality of God, Krishna. These only affect the souls that are in conditioned consciousness, in material conditioned consciousness. So I will try to now end quickly in just 5 minutes because I'm realizing that time is limited. So the commentaries of Baldev Vidyabhushan and Vishwanath Chakravarti are quite short, so I will just summarize them in 5 minutes. So Baldev Vidyabhushan, he says, the Lord further explains the nature of the body and Jivatma just discussed in 2 more verses. Understand that the substance known as Jivatma is eternal, Avinashi. This whole body, idam sarvam, is pervaded by the soul. The body is pervaded by the Atma's consciousness, its capacity to know objects beyond itself, including the body. So the consciousness of the Atma has a characteristic called dharma bhuta gyan, which means its capacity to know objects beyond itself. So no gross object and not even the body of a living entity can destroy that jiva, which is indestructible. So it cannot be destroyed, avinashi, and it is indestructible, avyasya, because it has a very small size. It is not accepted that the jiva is the same size as the material body. That is very small. It is very small, is understood from Shruti statements such as the following: Mundaka Upanishad 3.1.9, Esho Nuratma Chetasa Veditavyo Yasmin Prana Panchadha Samvivesha. This small Atma on which the 5 pranas rest is to be known by the consciousness. However, that infinitesimal jiva spreads throughout the body through its capacity to know objects other than itself. Thus the Lord, as the author of Vedanta Sutra says, Gunad Valokavat, the soul is pervasive like light. In the Gita also the Lord said, Yatha Prakashyatekaha, just as one sun lights up the whole world, this Atma illumines the whole body, O descendant of Bharat. So again, Prabhupada, we see he's deriving his commentary from Baldev Vidyabhushan's commentary when he talks about the sunshine as the innumerable radiant molecules, as these photons are particles from the sun. So similarly, the soul is a particle of Lord Krishna. It's part and parcel of Lord Krishna. So now the final commentary is the commentary of Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, and he gives a very nice description. This verse clarifies the meaning of the previous verse. So again, know this jiva, tat. When tat is referred, the Sanskrit word tat in this verse refers to the jiva that was discussed in the previous verse. Know this jiva, tat, as indestructible, which is spread throughout the body. Sarvam idam tatam. So it is spread, sarvam idam tatam, is spread throughout the body. But being spread throughout the body by its consciousness, this soul would be impermanent because it is of medium size only, being the size of the body. This is not so. For the Lord says, Shukshmanam apyaham jivaha. Of small things, I am the jiva. This is from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 16, Text 11. He says, Krishna says, Sukshmanam apyaham jiva. Of small things, I am the jiva. Of subtle things, I am the jiva. And so also it is said, Aragramatro hyaparopi drishta. The Shvetashvatara Upanishad 5.8 says, the inferior soul is seen as the size of the tip of a spoke. So we see that, in fact, I will not repeat, but Prabhupada refers to Balagra Shatabhagasya, the Shvetashvatara Upanishad text, and this he derives from Vishwanath Chakravarti's commentary, because Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur refers to the same text. So the last paragraph in Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur's commentary, by these statements of Shruti we understand that the jiva is very small. It has the power to spread itself throughout the whole body, just as pulverized gems or herbs when applied to the head, have the power to spread their nourishing influence throughout the body. There is nothing contradictory in being small and pervading the body. So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur is saying that it may seem contradictory. We are saying that the jiva is small, but yet it pervades the body. How can something so tiny pervade the entire body? It's just like a tiny source of light pervades the entire room. So similarly, the tiny soul, even though it is very small in size, it permeates the entire body. So this is not contradictory because of the nature of the soul. The nature of the soul is that its consciousness spreads throughout the body, just like the radiance of the light spreads throughout the room. So because of its dependence on upadhis or mistaken identities, the soul goes to various bodies in heaven and hell. In this way, the soul is also sarvagataha, going everywhere. Dattatreya, in the form of the Avadhuta Brahmana, says how the jiva, in the form of the aggregate of jivas at the beginning of creation, goes to different bodies. Tamahus triguna vyaktim shrijantim visvato mukham yasmin protam idam vishvam yena samsarate puman. According to the great sages, that which is the basis of the three modes of material nature and which manifests the variegated universe is called the Sutra or Mahat Tattva. Indeed, this universe is resting within that Mahat Tattva, and due to its potency, the living entity undergoes material existence. Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 11, Chapter 9, Text 20. Thus, the soul's pervasion of the body and still being minute is not contrary to its eternal nature, stated in the previous verse. Therefore, the word avyayasya is used in the verse also. It refers to the soul being eternal or nitya, as the Shruti says, Nityo nityanam chetanas chetananam eko bahunam yo vidadhati kaman. The Lord is the chief eternal among all eternals, souls. He is the chief conscious entity among all conscious entities. He is the one who fulfills the needs of all others. Svetashvatara Upanishad 6.13. The meaning of this verse. Now this was the primary explanation of this verse by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in which he explains that the soul is pervading the entire body, even though it's minute, just like the small light can pervade the entire room, permeate the entire room through its radiance. The soul permeates the entire body through its consciousness. The soul is also very fine and is very tiny. It cannot be measured or it cannot be destroyed by scientists because it is finer than the electron, finer than any particles that have been discovered by scientists or that can ever be seen by scientists or observed by scientists. And that this soul is actually, now, this soul is eternal and immutable. Now, he gives us a second explanation to this verse. He says, the body, the jiva, and the paramatma are all seen everywhere in all forms such as human and animal. The first two, the body and jiva, are mentioned in the previous verse. So the previous verse was mentioning that which is existent, the eternals, the soul, and that which is non-existent, the material body. So that's what the previous verse describes, the body, material body, and the spirit soul. And this verse, he says, describes the Paramatma. The third, Paramatma, is mentioned in this verse. It is indestructible and spread everywhere in the universe. So he's saying that this verse can also be used to refer to the Paramatma as the soul of the universe. So it is indestructible and spread everywhere in the universe. The word tu serves to distinguish Paramatma from the body and the jiva. The Paramatma is by its very nature different from matter and the jiva. So just like it is described in the Srimad Bhagavatam that Brahma is the intelligence, Lord Shiva is the ego, and Vishnu is the soul of this universe. So in his form as Garbhodakshay Vishnu, he is present in every universe, within the Garbha, within the womb of every universe. So this verse, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, can also be used to describe the Paramatma as the soul of the universe. So I will end here, and I apologize for a bit 15 more minutes over the time, but just wanted to share the different commentaries of the Acharyas, just to get a nice understanding of how the Vaishnava Acharyas understand this verse. So So please feel free to ask any questions now.
Will you please explain one small paragraph?
You just wait for the mic.
Third from last. Hare Krishna. Third from last paragraph.
In Srila Prabhupada's proper.
So the constitution of the atomic soul is admitted in all Vedic literatures, and it is also actually felt in the practical experience of any sane man. Only the insane man can think of this atomic soul as all-pervading Vishnu Tattva.
So Prabhupada is saying that we should not identify the soul with Krishna. That only, this is the Mayavad philosophy in which the atomic soul is considered one with the Supreme Soul, which is Krishna or Vishnu, and so it is not to be considered as all-pervading Vishnu Tattva, because this is how the Mayavadis will try to interpret this verse. They will say that when they say Yena Sarvam Idam Tatam, they will say this soul pervades the entire everything. So they try to explain that. Their misinterpretation is they say that the soul is one with the Supreme Soul which pervades everything. But that is, Prabhupada is saying, that is an incorrect interpretation, because the soul is actually only... Why is that an incorrect interpretation? Logically we can understand it is an incorrect interpretation because the soul is only knowledgeable about the pains and pleasures of this body. So if I say that my soul is cognizant about the entire universe, about everything, then that is an incorrect interpretation of the word sarvam in this verse. Because scientifically, logically, rationally, I understand that my soul is only cognizant about my own body, not about any other body, not about everything happening in the universe. So if a Mayavadi interprets this verse that the atomic soul is the all-pervading Vishnu Tattva, is the all-pervading God, then that is a wrong interpretation. Thank you for that very nice one.
But you are also giving the example that it can be used as Paramatma is pervading the whole universe.
Yes.
So that is Vishnu Tattva.
Yes, that
So
is the...
explain.
Yes, so Vishwanath
Differentiate.
Yes, so Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, he says that he gives the second interpretation of this verse as the Tat is referring to, that he describes the second interpretation of this verse, that the super soul is the soul of the universe. So the super soul is spread everywhere in the universe, but that super soul is distinct from the jiva, from the individual soul.
So, is this verse speaking about the jiva or the Paramatma?
So Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, his primary explanation is, it is speaking about the soul, the jiva, and that is how he explains, like 3/4 of his interpretation is just based on, he's explaining he's explaining it as the soul which is pervading the body, but then he gives a second interpretation in which he describes that we can also take this verse to refer to the Paramatma, and in that case the word sarvam refers to the universe. So now here, the reason we have to understand this rationally and logically is that what the Mayavadis can try to do is they try to mix up the two things. They will try to say that, okay, let's refer to this as the soul, the indestructible, the imperishable, let's refer to it as the soul, which is me, they say. And then they say, let's refer to sarvam, let's interpret that as everything. So they say that the soul, me, can occupy or permeate everything. So in that way, they make themselves they consider themselves as one with everything, one with the all-pervading Brahman, or the all-pervading super soul, the supreme soul.
So how do we know that this is the jiva and not everything?
Yeah, so the problem with that interpretation is that rationally, logically, Prabhupada says that the individual soul is only conscious of what's happening in its own body. That's why we know that interpretation is fallacious, because logically we know that my soul is only conscious about what is happening in my body. So that's why it's fallacious of me, it's irrational, illogical of me to explain this verse as, to translate Sarvam as the entire universe or everything, and the Tad as my soul, because my soul is not conscious about everything in the universe. So that's why it's an irrational explanation, irrational interpretation. But if Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, therefore, when he translates this or interprets it as the soul, then he translates Sarvam as the body, everything everywhere in the body, because that's a rational logical explanation. But his second explanation is that when it is referred to as the Paramatma, this imperishable or the indestructible, when it is referred to as the Paramatma, then Sarvam is translated as the universe or everything, because the Paramatma is the soul of the universe. This, as Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, he is conscious of everything happening in the universe. He is not, it's not just Shirodakshaya Vishnu, and Shirodakshaya Vishnu is the Paramatma in everybody's heart. Garbhodakshaya Vishnu is the soul of the universe, and Mahavishnu is the source of all these universes. So Mahavishnu breathes out all these universes, Garbhodakshaya Vishnu enters each of these universes, and he is the soul of the universe, and Shirodakshaya Vishnu enters every heart, every living entity, and is with every living entity as a super soul. And so the Supreme Personality of Godhead is, the super soul is the supreme soul of the universe. He's in that way, the Virat Rupa is considered to be an imaginary form of the Lord, is considered an imaginary form of the Lord, because it's a representation of the universe, and it's a way in which yogis meditate on the universe as a form of the Supreme Lord, and the soul of that form is the super soul, is Garbhodakshaya Vishnu, is the one who is present throughout the universe, because he is simultaneously present in every atom as Shirodakshaya Vishnu, and he is present as a soul, as Garbhodakshaya Vishnu in the universe. So then that explanation of Sarvam as the universe is logical and understandable. Thank you.
I'll ask you a quick question. Thank you. When we speak about consciousness, there's one explanation that the soul pervades the entire body through consciousness. And then also when we speak about the subtle body in Srimad Bhagavatam, it talks about the mind, intelligence, false ego, and the contaminated consciousness. So, can you explain the difference between these two terms?
Contaminated consciousness and
the consciousness which the soul pervades the entire body. What is the difference between the two?
Yes, so in the Srimad Bhagavatam, there are descriptions of elements such as the 5 gross senses, the working senses, the knowledge acquiring senses. Then there's the 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether. So that is 15 elements. So the working senses are the eyes, ears, nose, mouth, anus, not the eyes and nose, the hands, legs, mouth, anus and genitals. And then the 5 knowledge acquiring senses are the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, eyes, ears, nose, tongue, and touch. Yeah, so skin. So these are the 5 knowledge acquiring senses. And then the 5 material elements are the earth, water, fire, air, space or ether.
5 sense objects.
And the 5 sense objects are vision and touch and smell, taste, and so vision, smell,
Sound.
Okay, so vision, smell, taste, touch and sound. And so these are 20 elements, and then what is the 21st element?
It's mind, that is ego.
So the 21st element is the mind, the 22nd element is the intelligence, and the 23rd element, so sometimes it is described, in some lists it is described as the false ego, and some bliss is described as the Mahatattva, or the source of all of these other elements. But the contaminated consciousness is basically when the consciousness is covered by this false ego, and then when it is covered by the false ego, then it is now in the contaminated condition where it identifies with this mind, this body, these senses, and then tries to enjoy these sense objects. So contaminated consciousness is when the consciousness is covered by the false ego and tries to enjoy in this world as the doer, as the enjoyer. But it is not that the contaminated consciousness is a different identity, it's not a different element than the Atma, because it is simply, when we refer to contaminated consciousness, it is simply the description of the conditioned existence of the soul in this world. That the soul in this world is contaminated in its understanding that...
But this contaminated consciousness is a subtle body, which is matter.
The subtle body itself has many elements like mind, intelligence, false ego.
And soul is spirit.
The soul is spirit, yes.
So how can both be the same? How can this contaminated consciousness be an aspect of the soul?
Well, the contaminated consciousness is the phenomenon that happens when the pure soul, pure consciousness is covered by the subtle body. So contaminated consciousness, subtle body, and the pure consciousness, these are three different things. But contaminated consciousness, I'll just repeat it again. Contaminated consciousness is what happens. Contaminated consciousness is what we see, or what is a phenomenon that happens when the pure soul is covered by the subtle body. So when our pure consciousness, the pure Atma, spirit soul, is entangled by the false ego and this mind, intelligence, and identifies with this body and tries to enjoy this world, then that pure consciousness being covered is now in a state of, now that phenomenon is called contaminated consciousness. So it's not that contaminated consciousness is the subtle body, because the subtle body is comprised of mind, intelligence, false ego, these three elements. So, and it's not that the contaminated consciousness is the pure consciousness, because the soul actually described, it can never, it's always pure. But it's when it is covered, when that pure element is covered, when that pure soul is covered by these material elements, such as the subtle body, the false ego, the intelligence, and mind, then what results is contaminated consciousness. Then the actions of the soul are contaminated. The actions that I take in this world are contaminated. They are under the influence of false ego. They may be under the influence of goodness or passion or ignorance. But when the soul is released from all these, from the covering of the subtle body, it is no longer covered by false ego, no longer covered by the intelligence of the mind. When it is free from the influence of this pure world, the three modes, then it is in its pure original state. Then it is in that every action that the soul does is pure and in service to Krishna. So I hope that helps understand. But these are very technical.
What does Mahaprabhu say when he says Cheto Darpana Marjanam? What is the Chitta then?
Chit is consciousnness. It is described that Chit is translated as consciousness. So Cheto Darpan Marjanam, it is the it's basically, so Darpan means mirror, and Marjanam means we have to cleanse this mirror, because right now what has happened is that the dust of material contamination has covered the mirror. So it is now, when we look into the mirror, all we see is our material identities. But when we remove that dust of material contamination, then what we see when we look into our heart is the original pure consciousness. So that dust is the material contamination of different identities, like I'm Indian, or I'm American, or I'm white, black. So these are all material identifications, or the material dust that we need to remove from our mirror of the heart. And once that material contamination is removed, once, like all these subtle contaminations in the subtle body of mind considers that I am Indian, these are the thoughts in my mind. This is what defines my identity. I'm an Indian, or I'm an Oxford scholar, or I'm a PhD, or I'm a scientist. In my case, these are all my coverings or material contaminations, and which define all my actions are influenced by these coverings. So that's why all my actions are biased if I am under this covering. Mostly I am. But I need to try to remind myself that no, I'm not an Indian, I'm not this, or I'm not that. I'm the original pure servant of Krishna, and I need to act in that way. That's how I can, when we chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, we are asking the Lord, please engage me in your service. All I want to do is be your servant. All I want to do is just be an instrument in your service. Krishna said, Nimitta Matra Bhava Sabya Sachi, just act as an instrument in my service. That is our original identity. And once we act in that capacity, as in that understanding, then we are free. If our every action is with the understanding that I am just a servant of the Supreme Lord Krishna, Gopi Bhartu Pad Kamalyo Das Dasan Das, that I'm just a servant of the servant of the servants of Krishna, then of the one who is the protector of the gopis, then my consciousness is now in its original pure state. Now I am reinstated to my original pure Krishna consciousness, my original pure consciousness of the soul, which is naturally Krishna consciousness, because it is a part and parcel of Krishna. Then in that state, every action of mine is no longer under the influence of the material modes. It's no longer contaminated consciousness. It's no longer influenced by the contaminations of the designations. So, is there another question?
I wanted to just make one more comment.
We had a wonderful devotee named Sariputta Das who developed, I suppose it was grounded in that,
yes.
What was a German scientist? The influence of consciousness on experiments.
Yes.
And he had a very developed thesis on this very thing, just the intense influence of consciousness, even your consciousness, on something that you're observing.
Yes. In fact, in fact, even at Princeton, there was a research called the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory, called the PAIR Laboratory, Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Laboratory. And this laboratory actually did research on this very topic. They showed that there was an actual statistically significant difference when the observer focused and tried to change the outcomes of random number generators. There's actually statistically significant bias. Otherwise, it's always a normal distribution, always there is no bias. But when the observer focused, the mind was able to influence the outcome of the random number generator. There was a statistically significant, and all the statistical significant tests showed that yes, there is a bias. Yes, the mind is affecting the outcome. So that again shows the consciousness is a more powerful, is more subtler and finer element than material elements. Thank
That's
you.
what it says.
Because it's subtle, yes.
Mother, you want to say something?
Put it on.
Put it on.
Hare Krishna. Yeah, I was just going to make the comment that while text 16 and 17 could be seen to refer to both the super soul, to either the super soul or the individual soul, if we go on to text 18, then it's clear that Krishna is actually talking about the individual.
Yes.
Because he says, fight Arjuna. So he's not talking about the super soul in that
Yes, very true. In that case, then, in the 18, now Krishna clearly describes that ime deha, that antamanta ime deha, nityas yokta sharirinaha, anashina aprameyasya, tasmat yutyasva bharata. Yes, that in 18, Now, it is clearly understood to be discussing the embodied soul, that which is occupying the deha, the material body.
We'll get a class on that on Wednesday.
Yeah.
No need to go.
But I think in purport Prabhupada expanded the analogy of soul being the driver of this body in the same way Krishna, God, Vishnu is the driver of the Vishvatma. We are Atma, he is Vishvatma. So he is the soul of the whole universe. Vishnu is universe and Atma is soul. So I think he is just expanding the analogy. But the topic is the soul.
Yeah, of course, we're not going to criticize Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, but we have to understand
Context.
yeah, the context, why he's saying it. He's not saying that you should read the verse in this way. He's just saying that it, like he's saying,
Can be used.
yeah, in the same way that Krishna and us are simultaneously one and different. Therefore, this verse simultaneously, in the same way we can interpret it that way. But Krishna here is speaking about the individual soul.
We're on the battle of Kurukshetra.
Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada.